Okay, today's topic is accents, which is kind of a fun one. Alright, so what do I mean when I say accent? Well, it's not a term that we actually use in linguistics a whole heck of a lot, but more colloquially it can refer to two kind of different things. There's sort of the Queen Elizabeth type of accent and then the Jackie Chan type of accent. You probably intuitively sort of can already tell what the difference would be between the two. So Queen Elizabeth speaks that prestigious received pronunciation variety of English that we talked about in one of the dialects lectures. And when we say that she has an accent, we're talking about her pronunciation, sort of the way she says things. She speaks English just like we do. It is a different dialect, but it's a dialect that mostly varies in terms of pronunciation. So it's an aspect of the phonetic or phonological part of her grammar that she has inside of her brain, inside of her mind. It's really just about how she says things. She says the same words in the same order. She builds words in the same way. She just says some of them a little bit differently. So that's her accent. With Jackie Chan, it's a little bit different because he is speaking with an accent that is non-native. He is a second language speaker of English. And so he maintains some aspects of his native language pronunciation, which is what, I'm not even sure, probably Chinese, when he speaks English. So that's what I mean by his accent. But just like Queen Elizabeth, even though his accent sort of derives from a different place, foreign language versus just a different dialect, it's still referring to his phonetics or his phonology. It's referring to his sounds, his pronunciation. So that's what I mean when I say accent. So if Queen Elizabeth and Jackie Chan have an accent, do I have an accent? And the answer is definitely yes. I have a not really a very exciting accent from probably most of our perspectives. Just kind of bland, Midwestern type accent, but it definitely is an accent. And if you were to ask, a speaker of British English, they would say that, of course, you have an American accent. And, of course, you guys have accents too. Everybody has an accent in any language that they're speaking. So basically this just means that we all have distinctive sound patterns. There's a tendency to think that people who talk like us don't have accents and people who don't talk like us do. And, when you're talking about accents, that's kind of the way that you talk about it. But just keep in mind that even though I may say that, oh, I don't really have an accent, I just mean that I don't have an accent, I don't have a different accent from the other people in my linguistic community. Okay, so this is a really interesting issue when we start to think about international TAs, and they're going to be called ITAs in these slides. So at many universities, especially large research universities like the U of A, there is a high percentage of international TAs. So you can see here on this chart, whereas there's only about, 5% foreign undergraduates. There's over 30%, so about a third of TAs are actually not native English speakers, they're foreign. So if you haven't already had an international TA, the chances are really good that you will by the time you're done here at the U of A. And so sometimes with international TAs, students, they often don't prefer them. So we're going to look a little bit at some of these accent stereotypes and see what we can learn. Alright. So research has shown, there's a lot of research into this, that a lot of undergraduate students perceive international TAs as being less beneficial, less competent, less helpful, worse teachers, etc. than native speaker TAs and STAs. And undergraduates will often say that the accent is a big part of the problem. You might remember on your TA evaluation forms, you probably have a question about whether your TA's English was clear and comprehensible. I'm not sure exactly what the wording is at the U of A, but back when I was an undergraduate, I definitely had that question on TA evaluations. However, it turns out, if you look into it more clearly, international TAs go through rigorous testing and training programs. As you know, native person from the United States, I only had to have 1 day of TA training when I was beginning graduate school, whereas the international students had about a week of training and testing, and you're not allowed to be a TA unless you score very highly with your oral English skills. So there's sort of this dichotomy here where undergraduate students perceive that their TA's English is not that great, and where this actually has a real effect on students' learning, but the TAs themselves, if you look at it a little bit more objectively, their English skills are pretty good. So Rubin, 1992, conducted an experiment looking at this phenomenon. He played, these are two people who were TAs in linguistics at the University of Arizona, maybe 5-10 years ago. These were not the actual pictures from the study, but he recorded a native English-speaking female giving a 4-minute lecture, and then he played it to undergraduate students at a large university somewhere in the southeast United States. And it was the same audio recording, but he would play it either with a Caucasian face, so the students, you'd see a picture on the TV screen with a Caucasian face and hear this lecture for 4 minutes, or you'd see an Asian face and hear the same lecture for 4 minutes. So it was the same voice both times and just a different face. And then the students, after listening to this lecture, they were asked to rate the instructor on different characteristics. And they were also asked to take a test to show the degree of comprehension, how much of the lecture they understood. I'm not going to go over this table in great detail, but basically you can see here ethnicity was a major factor. Students actually understood less when they saw the Asian face, even though it was completely non-accented, completely native English speaking. They understood less of the same voice when it was an Asian face than when it was a Caucasian face. And they also perceived the speech as being more accented when they heard the lecture and saw the picture of the Asian face than when they saw the picture of the Caucasian face. So the ethnicity of the person that they thought was giving the lecture influenced how accented the speech sounded to them, and how much of the speech they actually understood. Which is kind of crazy because, again, they're listening to the same voice with the Caucasian face and the Asian face. Alright, so as I said, they thought they heard a foreign accent when they saw that foreign-looking person, and their comprehension scores were actually worse when they saw the foreign-looking person. On the other hand, there is one positive aspect of this. Students who had a lot of international TAs did just fine. So, getting used to having international TAs, they understood perfectly fine. They didn't hear an accent that wasn't there. They were sort of more accurate in what they perceived and what they learned. Also, these students they understood more just across the board. So what do we know? Well, foreign accents can be thick enough to make it difficult for speakers to be understood. We've all, been in this situation where we can't understand someone because their accent is so thick. However, the speech of international TAs is not actually reaching that level. They are not even allowed to be a TA if their accent is not understandable. However, as this study shows, students may find international TAs to be more difficult to understand than they actually are. With that Asian-looking face, students actually understood less, even though it was non-accented speech. And because of this, students will perform more poorly on comprehension tests. Also, students will tend to assume that international TAs are less competent than they actually are. Is this only in school? Well, no. This is actually on the job market as well. You can read through this slide on your own later. I'm trying to keep this under 10 minutes, but definitely read through this on the PDF. Alright, so what's the take-home message? Well, some accents sound nice, some don't. You can have your opinions about that, but you don't want to jump from which accents sound nice to the stereotype that just because it's accented, the person who's speaking isn't as competent, they don't know as much. Because you're probably going to be wrong. All right, that is accents.